if I'm honest, I just want to hide. Not like in a dramatic way, but I'm talking about disappearing off the grid or avoiding. I'm not talking about like avoiding responsibility or anything like that. I mean the quieter version, wanting a bit of space, wanting a bit of stillness, wanting to be at home with it. Doors closed, face down, head clear. Sarah here, aka the business fixer. And those of you who already know me quite well, I am quite a confident person. I'm always someone, I'm also someone who needs solitude to reset. After having a seriously busy run of meetings, conversations, events, and decision making, in those situations, I naturally go quieter. I'm a bit less responsive and I retreat to recharge. In life, that is a very healthy thing, and we do need to make sure that we do recharge and reset. But in business, if everything relies on you, that can be incredibly dangerous, because if your business cannot cope when you step back, even briefly, and the issue isn't about the effort or commitment, it's usually the fact that the way that the business has been structured over time has led to that. And more often than not, that structure has never been fully supported with delegation in a sustainable way. I'm not necessarily saying that there is a lack of delegation altogether, but it's more an underdeveloped version of it. And this is where I see some business owners going a little bit pear-shaped, because what they'll do is they'll delegate tasks, but they'll keep control. So they hand things over, but they're the ones that are staying responsible. And they try to step back, but without building the foundations that make stepping back sustainable. So let us slow this down a little bit and deal with the real question that business owners are asking, but I can guarantee are rarely saying out loud. And that is, how do I delegate properly as a business owner without quality dropping or things going wrong? Okay, let's think about this. This is where I want to explain why delegation is a leadership issue, not necessarily a productivity one. Okay, so listen to this, right? So delegation is often framed as a time management tactic, something you do when you're too busy. That framing is incomplete. It's not wrong, it's just incomplete. And that is why delegation is so often feels so frustrating. Delegation is absolutely about time and energy management, but it's also about ensuring that what sits on your plate as a business owner also reflects the highest value and the highest impact use of your time. But it doesn't stop there. Delegation is also about designing a business that no longer relies on your constant presence to function well. And how many of you can honestly say right now your business functions well without your presence? Love to hear your comments in the chat. Now, if you are still deeply involved in things like your client delivery, decision making, problem solving, and overnight, as your business grows, you eventually become the constraint. You become the bottleneck, not because something is wrong, but because the business has outgrown a founder-centric way of operating. And we all start our businesses in that way, because ultimately when we first start, it is usually just us. We might have a bit of support, but generally we start a lot of the time just us. So it's not an uncommon way of operating. But this is where I see so many business owners, they get stuck because things like their revenue will be solid, there is a team that exists, and on paper things look fine, but in reality, everything still roots back through you. Does this sound familiar? Right? Now, delegation is not just about trust. It is about clarity, structure, and intention in terms of how the business operates. Okay? So what is the hidden cost if you do not delegate properly? Most business owners delay proper delegation because they fear quality will drop. What they fail to see is that the quality is already at risk. When delegation is unclear or inconsistent, several predictable problems emerge. The business becomes reactive rather than intentional. And the amount of times I see businesses being reactive, it's commonplace. How many are you prepared to admit that your business is in that place? I'd be interested to know. Decisions slow because they wait for you. Small issues escalate because there is no ownership other than you. Clients experience inconsistency depending on how involved you are. But your team also stops to think independently, not because they're not capable, but because the system teaches them to constantly defer to you. Over time, that's when things like confidence erodes and reliance increases, and that's not what you want in your business. From a personal perspective, the cost is even higher for you because your mental load is constantly increasing. Your time for strategic thinking reduces, which is what you need to be able to move your business forward. Time off then feels really risky rather than being restorative, because because you are constantly mentally on, because you're worried about what is going on, right? And in the long term, the biggest cost is the business value. A business that depends on the owner is then harder to scale, harder to sell, and far more fragile than it appears. And I'll tell you what, delegation done badly creates chaos. Delegation avoided creates dependency, and delegation done properly builds resilience and scalability. Where do you want to be in that? And I can guarantee you don't want to be in a situation where your business is fragile. You don't want to be in a place where you can't scale it or you want to sell it. Okay, so there's a few things that I see where business owners don't quite hit the mark when it comes to delegation. Because before we get into how to delegate effectively, it's important that we clear up a couple of misconceptions, because delegation is not abdication, right? Handing something over without clarity, context, or support does not create ownership. That's when it does create risk. Delegation works best when tasks, responsibility, and accountability are aligned. Tasks are the starting point, but effective delegation requires the responsibility to be clearly defined. So what is that person doing? What are they responsible for? And accountability to be shared in a way that supports ownership rather than dependence. Okay, so this is also where many businesses unknowingly fall into reverse delegation. So problems are then handed back to you as the business owner. They moved up the chain. Decisions default to you as the owner, and responsibility quietly migrates back to where it started, which defeats the whole object. Okay. Strong delegation relies on consistency. Clear standards and documented ways of working create stability across the business. Within that structure, there should still be space for those doing the work to also suggest improvements and find better ways of working without undermining agreed standards. Okay. And finally, delegation is not a one-off event. It is an ongoing process that evolves as the business grows. Roles change and people develop. Understanding these distinctions is what separates effective delegation in business from ongoing frustration. So let's also talk about how delegation also needs sequencing. And what do I mean by that? Okay, so one of the most useful frameworks I've learned recently is from Dan Martell's Buy Back Your Time. He introduces the concept of the replacement ladder, which focuses on the order in which you should remove yourself from the business. This matters most because delegation fails often due to poor sequencing, as well as the accountability and responsibility aspect not being done effectively. You do not start by delegating the leadership or the strategic direction. That's the worst thing you can do. You earn the space for those by removing your low value tasks first. So the typical progression begins with your admin, right? So who's in charge of your diary, for example? Tasks that consume time but do not require your expertise or specific decision making is what you then delegate first. Next comes the client delivery. This is often the hardest step to be able to pass over emotionally, but it's also the most transformative. Freeing yourself from being the primary fee earner creates capacity for you to be able to lead properly. That doesn't mean that you stop doing the thing that you love. You just don't need to do as much of it, and you're not the one that's doing it all. Then you follow up with marketing, then your sales, and then finally you then add in the leadership layers that allow the business to operate without constant founder input. But trying to skip any of these steps will create instability. Delegation works best when it follows a deliberate, staged process. And regardless of where you are in the sequence, the principles below, I know, are what is going to help you make delegation work well at every stage. So please put in the chat where you are in your replacement ladder. How far have you got in terms of your team? Okay, so let's now talk about the 5 principles for delegating properly as a business owner. Number 1, delegate clarity before responsibility. What do I mean by that? Most delegation fails because expectations are implicit rather than explicit. You know what good looks like. You know the standard, but unless that is articulated clearly, the person taking on the responsibility is always going to be guessing. Proper delegation starts with the clarity on the outcome, the process to be followed, and the standard you expect at each stage. This includes how the work should be done today and where there is scope to improve it over time. In practice, this often means writing down far earlier than feels necessary. This is where you start creating your SOPs, your standard operating procedures. And I tell you what, this is game-changing for your business. You may think, no, I don't need to do it. It will help you scale over time, okay? So what feels obvious to you as the owner is rarely obvious to someone stepping into the responsibility for the first time. Clear process examples of what good looks like and agreed checkpoints remove the ambiguity and dramatically reduces the need for rework later. This clarity protects quality. Without it, even capable people will underperform, and you don't want that. Okay, number 2, delegate tasks and outcomes with ownership at the center. When you delegate tasks, you stay involved. When you delegate outcomes, you step back. Effective delegation brings tasks and outcomes together through ownership. That's the responsibility piece that I was talking about earlier. Someone understands what they are doing, what success looks like, and what they're accountable for delivering. You'll actually get what you need from them. Ownership then changes their behavior. People think differently when they are responsible for a result rather than simply completing a checklist. It also reduces the escalation to you. When people own results, they solve problems instead of passing them upward. Number 3, match delegation with training, not assumptions. Delegation should stretch people, but not overwhelm them. This requires judgment on your part. Start with lower risk responsibilities, observe their performance, provide feedback, and increase scope gradually. When something goes wrong, and this is key, treat it as information about the delegation process. Often the issue is missing clarity, insufficient training, or lack of ongoing support. It is not about that particular individual necessarily being the issue here. And this is where this is really, really important, because I see so many business owners, when they delegate, they think it's because the individual they've delegated to is not capable. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, because it does, but Largely, it is down to the fact that that person is not clear, they haven't had the right training, and they haven't had the ongoing support that they need. Okay, it's not, delegation is not a test to see whether someone can cope. It is a development process. When you view delegation as part of growing people rather than simply handing work over, the quality of outcomes improve alongside confidence and capability within your team. Delegation works best when people are set up to succeed. Number 4, build the systems that support your independence, right? But support independence generally within the business. If delegation relies on you answering questions constantly, it defeats the object and is completely incomplete. Processes, documentation, and clear ways of working are what allow people to operate independently. This is where I'm talking about the SOPs that I touched on earlier. They give clarity on how work is done, protect standards, and reduce the need for constant clarification. Well-designed systems reduce friction rather than flexibility. You can still be flexible with these, but you've still got to have, a set standard. They provide the clear starting point, they make expectations visible, and allow improvement to become intentional rather than accidental, rather than relying on memory or informal knowledge. And that is usually where things go pear-shaped, because we don't always remember things accurately. Okay, number 5. Let go of your need to be the benchmark. This is one of the hardest parts for you business owners. People will not do things exactly how you would. Let it go. That does not mean standards are dropping. It often means the business is benefiting from deeper, more specific knowledge held by those closest to the task. This is big. When delegation is done well, standards remain consistent, but methods will evolve, and be open to that, because being open to that evolution strengthens the business performance and often leads to an even better outcome than your original approach. Your role is to protect outcomes, culture, and quality, not to replicate yourself through others. Okay, now there is going to be set standards that are across the board, are the ones that you are expecting. That is fine. But in terms of the methods of how things are done, there may well be some adjustments. Okay, if results are achieved and standards are met, interference undermines the ownership, right? Delegation only sticks when people are allowed to truly own what they are responsible for. Okay. Delegation is also an identity shift. At its core, delegation requires you as a business owner to redefine your role. You move from being the person who ensures everything is being done to the person who ensures the business performs well without you. That shift is uncomfortable. I'm not going to pretend it's not. It challenges control, relevance, and your identity, but it is also the gateway to growth, resilience, and your freedom, which is what you ultimately created this business for, didn't you? A business that cannot cope when you step away is not strong, it's dependent, and that is not what you want. Okay. Now, learning how to delegate a business is not about letting go blindly. It is about designing a business that can perform consistently, even when you are not the center of everything. If you recognize yourself in any of what I've talked about today, right? And if you feel like you are the bottleneck in your business, the person that's fixing everything, or the person that is always holding it all together, then it is now time to get objective about how your business is really operating. And the best way in which you can do that is if you undertake my business performance health check. It's why it exists. It gives you a clear, honest view of where dependency, bottlenecks, and delegation breakdowns are limiting business performance. It literally looks at all of your whole entire business. So if you want to be able to grow without the burnout, then this is where you start. So if you are interested, just simply comment the word health as it says, and I will send you the link. So hopefully you found today an interesting one. I think delegation is something that we are all guilty of not necessarily doing effectively. And this is a key way that will make a huge difference from you to be able to go from being operator to a leader and the business no longer depending on you. So thanks guys for listening, and I will see you all very soon.